Alright, welcome to our third session. Thank you for coming. The following session, All's Well That Starts Well, Setting Up for Successful Classroom Management, will be presented by Miss Anna Hahn, who is the teacher at Mount Hope Lutheran School in Castle, Wyoming, where she has taught grades K-2 through to 5 in various Latin classes. Please welcome Miss.
Thank you so much. It's really fun to be here at CUW, my alma mater, where I graduated with my major in classical Lutheran education. It was actually in this very basement in a neighboring classroom that one of my professors first told me after a presentation, hey, you'd be a great teacher. And I remember that day to this day, so it's really neat that I get to be here to talk to you about teaching. So, kind of the inspiration for this talk was just the fact that no matter how good of an education you get learning content, whether that's high school, college, it's kind of hard to prepare for just like the grind of now I have all these kids in front of me. I have to teach some things, but I also have to manage them in order to teach them effectively. And there aren't a lot of resources out there for specifically classical Lutheran sort of classroom management principles. So I'm hoping that this will be a sort of resource for anyone in need or who wants a refresher on that sort of thing. And kind of, I guess to go along with that, I'm curious who is here, like kind of what your teaching area is. So if I could just like get a show of hands, how many of you are homeschool people who either homeschool or maybe are homeschooling, homeschooler? All right, and what about like, I don't know, brick and mortar school? I don't know why they call it that because homes are also brick and mortar. But, the typical school where people got off the kids. Okay. All right, and then just kind of typical teaching experience. Who has had like, let's say, 15 plus years of teaching? Okay, wow. I'll be asking you a question. What about like between 5 and 15 years? So like, yeah, pretty much a feet under you. Okay. Has anybody like either you've only taught a year or maybe you've never taught? Okay, nice balance. I like it. So kind of like I was saying before, the goal of this talk is to review the theological and philosophical groundwork for classroom management, then apply that groundwork to 3 key things you'll teach your students during the first few weeks of school: obedience, procedures, and transitions. If you look at the outline that I have for you, which came in towards the end of transition time, they were there on the end. Hopefully everybody got 2 handouts. With some of the outline kind of has these steps for you. So theological and philosophical groundwork, that's what we'll go over here in a second. And then the 3 things you'll be teaching your students are listed there: obedience, procedures, and transitions. The helpful lists I'll kind of reference throughout. They kind of plug into that outline there. So I'll let you know when we're to the helpful list section. When these 3 things are in place, you'll be set up for a happy, productive year. The first few days of school are crucial because you're setting up your expectations for your students. So the question at hand here is, what should I do during the early days of the school year to set it up for success? So preliminaries here, it's lots of work. It's going to take a lot of planning on your part and a lot of forethought to make sure you have in mind what you want so you can teach it to your students. But that lots of work and planning pays off big time. So you put in the work before the school year, you put in the work the first few days, and then it might sound depressing, but by the second half of the school year, everything's going to run so well. And it gets easier as it goes too. It's not like you're like laboring uphill for 12 weeks or something. So let's start off with the theological and philosophical groundwork. This is stuff that I'm pretty sure we all know here if we're familiar with it at CCLE, but it's so important I just have to kind of lay that on. So first let's talk about teachers. Who are teachers and where does our authority come from? Teachers act in the stead of parents, and their authority derives from the 4th commandment, a reality that should evoke both reverence and relief when managing children. So Because parents are the ones entrusting their children to teachers, teachers therefore derive their authority from the parental office. That means that the fourth commandment applies to teachers. So when your students are obeying you, they are doing it not because you have some esoteric, vague office of teacher, but because they're obeying the fourth commandment. So this helps us as teachers to be confident when we're instructing students, when we're disciplining students, right? It's not like it's vested in me. It's actually from the parents who actually get their authority from God. So it gives you confidence, and it also gives you reverence for your test because you're acting instead of God in whatever capacity you are as teacher. And it's a relief because the buck doesn't stop with you. So if you're having trouble with a student or you're not sure what to do, you always have a higher authority to whom you can appeal. So whether that's the headmaster or contacting the parent, or entrusting, Lord, I don't know what to do, entrusting the children to God, doesn't come stop with you, which is a big relief. And then just kind of practically speaking, this is good to keep in mind if you need to change something. So your rules are not the authority, your routines are not the authority, you are the authority. So if you need to change something, when we get onto the procedures, transitions, you can do that. And your students will know, fourth commandment, we trust Ms. Hahn, whoever, and we're going to listen to what she says, not listen just to the rule. So that's kind of in a nutshell who teachers are, and that plays into later how we handle students in the class. Next on to students. Students are both saints and sinners. So when we manage a classroom, we should treat them as such, new creations whom we can help to fight the old man. So your students are first and foremost saints. In Lutheran schools, pretty safe to say the students are all Christians, right? And if they're not, you're in a Christian environment. So, Lord willing, the Holy Spirit will move them to become Christians by hearing His word. A lot of your students are probably Lutheran at the Lutheran school. But when we treat them as saints, we're keeping in mind their identity as Jesus baptized saints. He bought them with His blood; they're very precious to Him. And that's how we need to treat them. We also know that as saints, they have the Holy Spirit in them, which means they have love for God's law. Right? They're not inherently, as saints, wanting to do the wrong thing. That's not what the Holy Spirit does. The Holy Spirit moves people to love God's law. And then, so because we are saints, because they're fellow Christians, we're called to bear one another's burdens. So fulfill the law of Christ. So if you're having a hard time with a student, bearing with that student is part of treating her as a Christian, treating her as a sinner. It is not good when, I'm not saying I'm not guilty of doing this, but it's not good when teachers primarily speak about their students or treat their students like just naughty little rascals who need to be good. Because now they're fundamentalizing them. It's not who they are. So we need to speak of them and treat them as Christians. At the same time, we know that students are sinners. So this has a couple of implications for management. First of all, when they sin, it's not a shock to you, right? You know it's coming. You know that someone's going to say something mean or be disrespectful. It's just going to happen. But it also gives us an element of sympathy because we're also sinners. So, not that we let a sin go, but that we understand their struggle and then can help them through it. And kind of third, as sinners, we're helping them fight that old man, right? We're helping them resist the sinful nature that is in them. Discipline, correction, good habits, and of course, most importantly, confession and absolution. When they sin, we teach, say, I'm sorry, I forgive you, and then the sin is gone. Okay, so that lays the groundwork for whom we're working with in classroom management. The kind of philosophical and theological piece that I'll handle here before section 2 is the idea of leisure. And I'll explain about that in a second. A Lutheran teacher should cultivate an atmosphere of leisure in his classroom, leisure rightly defined, because leisure is the reality for Christians and the best environment in which to learn. So you're not only establishing your relationship with your students, your authority, who they are, you're also establishing the atmosphere of your classroom. What's the feeling here? what's the vibe, as we say now, right? So leisure is defined rightly. I'm pretty convinced that's what we're going for here. Has anybody seen the movie Daddy Daycare? Because it's kind of what I think about. I think when people think of a classical school, they think of that. Everybody's in uniforms, you're drilling things, it's very strict, nobody's having fun. And that's sort of like a rigor for rigor's sake kind of thing. Of course, we have good expectations. We want to be thorough, we want to be rigorous, but it has a purpose. It's not just, I want a factor line. Of course, the other side of the course to fall off of is the sort of unschooling model where, the kids can do whatever they want, or the sort of Montessori thing where student-led education, right? So you can't fall off either side there. But I think leisure meets in the middle very nicely, and it's also the Christian way to establish the atmosphere in your classroom. So what do I mean by leisure? I do have that definition for you on the lists there. Leisure is an attitude of serene contemplation and reception of the world, and of happiness and peace with one's place in it, and his place before God. A man at leisure looks at himself and the world and says, it is good. This definition comes from Joseph Pieper's essay, Leisure, the Basis of Culture, which I'm actually studying here. I'm guessing you probably are familiar with it if you've read it. This is sort of a boiled down version of at least my understanding of what he defines as leisure. Joseph Pieper was a philosophy professor at the University of Munster in the 20th century. And he was kind of fighting against what he calls the workaday man, meaning you're just, you value things based on how hard you worked for them, and the lives of man were not of a receptive nature. So it's what can I get, what can I work for? And Pieper points out, among many other great insights, that some knowledge is not gained by working, but it's gained by receiving. For example, standing outside, looking up at the stars, and noticing things, right? That would be a receptive type of learning. And I'm sure you can think of your own version of that. And your Lutheran mind might be jumping ahead to, what's the greatest thing of all that we receive? What's our greatest knowledge? It's receiving from God's word. He also points out, which I guess I kind of mentioned this already, something's value is not measured by how hard we worked for it. So it'd be kind of silly to say like, I mowed this lawn and I gained $20 and I was sweating, it was hard, I was tired, but that $20 is more valuable because I worked for it than this free $1,000 check that my own teacher gave to me, right? That's just kind of silly. But I think that's how we tend to think, is that work measures the value of things. But if we can kind of get rid of that idea in our classrooms and encourage a receptive type of learning, it's very valuable. So why leisure? Why was this an important part of your classroom's atmosphere? Well, first of all, it's just a Christian reality. The fact is that we are at peace, according to this definition. We're at peace with God through the blood of Jesus. We're at peace with our fellow man through the blood of Jesus, and we know our place in the world. We know our Creator. You can kind of think of the 3 articles of the Creed here. Right? We're made by God. We know our place in it, have dominion over the world, and so forth. Genesis stuff there. We're redeemed. We're sanctified. So the reality is we are at leisure. So why would we not convey that to our students? It's also just a robust view of learning. Like I was giving some examples. Like the only way that we learn isn't just the way. We don't just learn by memorizing things and taking information, working hard. And if we're at leisure, if we know this reality of being at peace and the enjoyment of contemplating things, it does give us the freedom to work hard. So if I know all is well, I don't have to worry about why I'm here, what I'm supposed to do, then I can focus all my energy on, hey, I really want to learn how to read the book, so I want to really learn Latin and work hard. I don't have to concern all these things. So how do you cultivate leisure in the classroom? I have a few thoughts on this. The main one, and the primary one being that divine worship is the source of all leisure. This isn't my idea. It comes from Pieper. And at the very end of his essay, he says worship is the foundation of cultus, of leisure. That it is cultus. But of course, it's like, keep going. And I haven't read some of other people's other things. Maybe he does elsewhere. And he's also a Roman Catholic, so he has kind of some backwards ideas about what worship is. He has talks about like man sacrifice to God, where it's really the other way around. So like you can expand on this idea of worship being leisure. So therefore, for a school, regular church attendance and daily chapel is what establishes your cult culture leisure. So church attendance for the kids, if they don't have that, how are they going to be at leisure? How are they going to know that they're actions of God? Because they're not seeing that every Sunday at church. So having that is the sort of expectation as a school, regular church attendance. And then daily chapel. Not every school is blessed to have it, but if you do, you know how wonderful it is. Especially if you've had a hectic morning or you're not sure what you're going to do for this lesson. You have all these things on your mind. If you can be at leisure for those 30, 35 minutes in chapel. So yeah, everything is well and at peace. And then whatever else happens in the day kind of seems to go down in importance. So divine worship, and then flowing from that, the life of the church normalizes that culture in your classroom. So topics come up throughout the day in your religion class, in literature, in history, in math, if you're really good at teaching math. How these thoughts from chapel or things you've been discussing in theology class that come out in all other areas of your class. So all different subjects tie into this. And then what we receive in worship naturally shapes our normal life. Third, the day can be structured, so your school day can be structured to maximize your leisure. So the vision is sort of, I have my class time. Within this class time, everything it's not rushed. We have time to discuss things, but then how do I get that chunk of time? Well, those transition times need to be very efficient, need to be very prompt, or we waste like 10, 15 minutes of that valuable time getting us from one place to another. So what I'm going to get to it soon here with procedures and transitions actually does help to cultivate leisure because it gives you the time to do it. Fourth, the teacher can foster leisure in the classroom by being at leisure. So if you take time to enjoy things and not just work all the time, and if you have an understanding of learning that's receptive, not just active, then that's going to overflow into your students, and they're going to get the same impression. Oh, this is how you learn. Now, is that easy to do as a teacher? No, it's hard to take time, but taking a day off, as I've been informed by Pastor Richard and never regret doing, right? You can carve out time, even just like an hour in the evenings. This is part of my work as a teacher, to read or whatever you do. That's just really important for your classroom. And then finally, about leisure, when students know they are at peace with each other, an atmosphere of leisure can flourish. So, inter-student relations. The two things that kind of stand out to me here are teaching and enforcing the Eighth Commandment. So, not talking bad about each other or not assuming the worst about each other, but instead we build each other up. If Johnny looks mean at Susie, Susie shouldn't assume Johnny's mad at me. She might just let it go, right? That's the Eighth Commandment. Or if something's really going on, then we proceed to the second thing that comes to mind, which is confession and absolution. So students are reconciled to one another. There's not this hanging over of some sort of conflict or some sort of grudge. Okay, so those are my thoughts on leisure and how to implement it in the classroom. I think let's wait on questions and thoughts until the end. I would like any thoughts about that, especially if you have ideas on how to cultivate leisure in the classroom. I'd love to hear them. But for now, let's move on to obedience, which is kind of about rules. I could have also headed this section rules. By laying the groundwork of obedience to authority and the norm of confession and absolution on the first day of school, you do not need a long list of classroom rules. So I'm going to draw your attention here to the two other definitions, rule and procedure, because this is a really important distinction when you're establishing first day of school things. A rule, at least when I'm using the word here, is a directive that is objectively right to follow and therefore a sin not to follow. Procedure is a learned habit that helps the classroom run well. So obedience is about rule because it's about doing what is right and not doing what is wrong. And this comes back to the definition of teacher, right? Your authority comes from God, so students are keeping the fourth commandment. This is something to go over on the first day of school with them, is talk about authority, where it comes from, so their understanding of that, and then give some examples, right, of how they would obey the fourth commandment in different scenarios. So, for instance, if Ms. Hahn tells you to spin in a circle, you would do it, because I said do it, or to line up quietly and not talk. Well, what would you not do? You'll just kind of like bounce around scenarios with them. Or a fun way to do it is the directions game. Maybe some of you do, where you give them a list of things to do so you can remember it. So in kindergarten, that might just be take out a red crayon and go line up, right? But they practice listening to you and doing what you say. That's seeing the fourth commandment, but it's fun. And they get to see for themselves is actually a good thing. It's not something that's just imposed on them. I don't like it. Or for older kids, you could scale that up however you want to. My third through fifth graders love it when I give them like 5 things and I have to remember them all so you can do it. So the directions game, that's a fun way to practice obedience. And like I said, obedience to authority covers most of that. So to have a list of rules in your classroom, like all of these things are wrong to do, is really not necessary, especially if you have students who are used to going to church and who are Christians and they know the 10 Commandments, because there's your list of rules, right? So you especially want to go over, third commandment things with them, how we behave in chapel, but then the second table of the law really covers the rest of it, and you can talk about examples of that too. So fifth commandment, you don't hit, but you don't have to have "we don't hit" on the board because they don't know that's wrong. Then you can establish rules, but I would just be very selective about them and make them very broad. I make them line up really closely with the 10 Commandments. And this just takes some kind of wisdom to know what to pick to be a rule. You might have to know your class really well. If you have a class that just loves to hit each other, you might want to have a rule that you review with them often that you don't hit. Or if you really want to avoid gossip in junior high, right? You might have a rule that you go over with them on the first day of school. Hey, girls, remember, we build each other up. Always do this. This is a rule. Okay. So it's a good idea to go through examples on the first day of school, put them in scenarios so they can practice obedience. Oh, yeah, okay, and then one more note on rules. If you do establish a rule, only establish a rule you can enforce. And this is probably something you've heard before. But I did learn this the hard way, my first year or two of teaching. Trying to keep it quiet in the hallway, right? So if you make a rule, no talking in the hallway, is that realistic to enforce? No, because there are plenty of times when the students are in the hallway, and you're not there at some point in a transition, right? So I found that doesn't work very well unless I know I'm going to be out there with them, checking on it. So a better way I found to get a hallway quiet is, they're going out there, they're doing their thing, and then when I get out there and give them a signal, this thing, and they'll do it, and they'll be quiet, that's something I can supervise and actually enforce. So don't make a rule you can't enforce. But then how do you enforce a rule? That's kind of part 2 here under obedience. A teacher serves his students the best by, from the very first day, upholding his word of authority firmly, modeling confession and absolution, and persisting in what is right, while also reserving the right to show mercy. So, from the very first day, you gotta stick to what you say. And err on the side of being stricter, because they need to know that you mean it, and they need to know that your authority is valid, because it is. Don't give too many warnings. You might feel like you're being mean, but of course, depending on the age of your kids, right? With kindergarten, I wouldn't say, you talk, spanking, but you need to stick with what you say, whatever consequence you have assigned. It's easier to loosen up than to tighten up. So it could be that maybe by the end of the year, some of your procedures, which I guess I'm getting ahead of myself here, things might loosen up a little bit, but it's a lot harder to add something than it is to take something away. And if you give too many warnings, it kind of gives your classroom a negative atmosphere, right? And this is a weakness of mine, because I don't like feeling mean. But if I have to give Johnny too many reminders not to talk, hey, remember, don't talk, don't talk, don't talk, then all of a sudden everybody else is kind of just like, and you can feel it, right? They're kind of like, this is not, I wish you'd stop talking, and Miss Mom would stop getting mad. You know, it's a lot easier to say, okay, well, you were talking, let's have a chat in the hallway so I can remind you not to talk. Or you can stay at the recess and let's practice not talking. I think that'll really help you if you have 5 minutes of really good practice, and then when you come back, you will remember not to talk. And I guess I'll add on there, when you give a consequence, you're not just being mean. You actually are helping them, especially if you design your consequences to be constructive for them. So I've done things like, you know, they're supposed to not talk when you're walking in line. And actually, I make that a rule because it's just something that I think they need to do in order to respect the other teacher's teaching, and so I can give them directions and so we can move quickly. So eventually, I guess this is where it gets a little fuzzy, right? Because you can't make everything a rule. You still have to enforce what you say. So once we've learned the procedure really well, if they're talking in line, they might have some kind of consequence. Anyway, if they're not doing it, you can get them to practice it, right? So, hey, you two, I think you need to practice walking in line quietly. And the best time to do it would be during recess, but we're kind of busy the rest of the day. So let's just take 5 minutes and why don't you walk back from here to chapel, 4 times and really quietly, and then you can go out to recess. So your discipline is constructive. Okay, and then what if they disobey? What if they are being belligerent? Johnny hit Susie and you need to address it. Well, this is what we just do as Christians all the time, right? You confront the sin, you teach confession and absolution with the exact words, I'm sorry, I forgive you. Teach them what that means, that the sin is actually gone. Make sure they know the difference between a consequence and still having guilt looming over them, right? Your sin is gone, it's forgiven. Now, to help you with this, we're going to do the walking, right? So they have to know that distinction. Also, make sure they know that the words "I forgive you" have divine power to forgive sins. They need to know that it's actually God forgiving their sins, because kids have really tender consciences sometimes, and they get really bothered by what they do wrong. So when they know that, it can be a big relief to them. Also, when you're calling out sin, keep in mind whether the offense was something in private or something in public, like for the whole class, and discipline that accordingly. So if this happened kind of out of sight and you saw it and you addressed it, you're not going to say, hey, everybody, Johnny needs to apologize, right? But if it happened in the whole classroom, you were publicly disrespected or something, then it gets addressed first. So you keep that in mind. What if they don't ask? What if Johnny hit Susie and he doesn't care? Well, something else I kind of learned the hard way, but you're not the Holy Spirit. You can't make them repent. All you can do is address it, tell them what God's law says, and then whatever happens, happens. This is where you can appeal to the higher authority, whether that's a master or a parent, and just leave it there. Because you can't make them sorry. What if they are sorry, but it happens again and again and again? It's a continual struggle. You just have to stick with it. You have to stick with your word. You have to be consistent. You have to be patient. Bear with them. But stick to the discipline that you set. This can be really discouraging. It can seem like it's never going to end. But in my experience, 9 times out of 10, it ends really well. I had a kindergartner who I sat with in chapel this year, and the toughest kid I've ever sat with in chapel before. I would say 3 or 4 days a week we were out in the narthex. I was reminding him the rules. There were times he had to go home. But we stuck with it, and with the help of all of his other teachers too, of course, and his parents. He, by I would say March, 0. Yeah, I know. But 0 problems. And he's great. He behaves well. He listens. So it's really encouraging when it does go well. I can just stick with it. So likely everything will go well. And if not, again, you just pass them up. I did what I could. And then finally, reserve the right to show mercy. And this, again, takes some wisdom. Distinguish the fight with an old man. I want to do good, but this vice is so hard to kick. And just like outright rebellion. And then if the kid is struggling with this simple nature, you might need to be merciful. Again, this year I can think of an example where a student had just continual trouble with things and behavior I would normally not allow, I would send home. But if I did that, the student would never get it because his struggle was just that continual that to correct it every time would have done nothing. So it's very contrary to our law-focused mind that this is wrong. But sometimes in the heat of it, you have to show mercy. And we've been shown mercy, so it is the Christian thing to do sometimes. So you have to know your students, you have to discern that struggle with the old man. Never compromising what is right, but you might give some leeway as to how to deal with the consequences. Okay, so that's a bit about obedience and what you will implement from day one in your classroom so they know the expectation. Let's go on to procedures. By making it a priority to teach well-planned classroom procedures during the first month of school, you are not merely inventing ways for teacher survival. You are primarily serving your students, assisting their desire to do what is right, and helping create an atmosphere of leisure, even if teaching the procedures seems tedious. So let's circle back to that definition of procedure, a learned habit that helps the classroom run well. So not something that's objectively right or wrong to do, right? It's not objectively moral to walk in a quiet line, but it's a learned habit that helps your classroom run well. Why teach procedures? Well, of course, you need some order in your classroom to teach. And so in some ways, that is a reason to teach your survival. But it's also good for your students. So good habits, like being quiet, like raising your hand, knowing where to go, it helps the new man do what is right. So we all know this from experience. If you're in the habit of doing something good, it's a lot easier to do it. If you're not in the habit of doing something good, it's harder. So procedures, giving them, routines and things to do, help them to do what's right. Also, some kind of procedure is inevitable. If you don't pick it, kids are going to pick it, and well, they don't know what's here. And then, like I mentioned in kind of the leisure section, it helps you build in that leisure time. So when you're efficient, you have more time to work. And then procedures themselves promote that atmosphere of leisure. I know my place, I know what to do, all is right. I know when I come in the morning, I know exactly what I'm going to bring, I know where I'm going to sit. I even know what Ms. Hahn is going to do in, the first 5 minutes of school. Thing. So it gives kids a kind of sense of security. Is this strict? Is it okay to be strict? Well, yes. If you mean by strict, if you mean consistent, and if you mean sticking to your word. And it's not just strict for strict's sake. It's not because we're classical, we're strict. But it's because for all these good reasons that I just listed, you need to be consistent and we need to have routines. It's good for kids. And so teacher attitude matters. The way that you approach it is, this is just how we do things. And it's great. And this is good for you. And it's just how it is. It's not like, you need to make sure to do this and this and make sure you don't do that. It just gives the wrong atmosphere and the wrong reasons for procedures. And kids like it. Right? They like to know what to do. Depending on what kind of school you're teaching in, you may do more or less of procedure planning and procedure implementation. So if you're homeschooling and you have 4 or 5 kids or however many, you don't need to necessarily line them up and march them around your house. But if you have a class of 20 kids, yeah, you need to do that in order to keep some order. So you kind of have to scale it to how you need. And like I mentioned earlier, later procedures will loosen up, but not yet. You can't do it until second semester at least, right? You've got to stick to very clear, regular procedures. Okay, so what procedures to use? Here are a few guidelines. So pick procedures that eliminate unnecessary interruptions. So like, may I get a drink? I have a question. You can think of procedures that maybe don't have words or you don't have to do anything so they can do those things. So like at our school, if you need a drink, they raise their hand like that. Or if you have a question, obviously you raise your hand. Also, establish procedures that eliminate unnecessary directions from you. So you can do things like write on the board, or even have enough routine that's the same every day where you don't have to tell the kids where to go or what to do, but they just know. Pick procedures that help students be confident and productive. Talked about that a little bit. They should always know what to do next. And then pick procedures that help you manage the classroom the way you want it. So if something is bugging you, you can fix it. For example, hallway's messy. I'm very type A, I do not like that. But I can fix it easily by giving a procedure to them, which I can actually do better at. But say every Friday before choir, we always do a hallway clean for like 2 minutes. Everybody fix their spot in the hallway. And that becomes part of the routine, it's a procedure, and it helps me feel better because the hallway's not messy anymore. So you can make it the class if I want. How to teach procedures. The biggest thing is to learn them yourself. So at the beginning of every school year, I make a list of procedures in order of priority, and then I make sure I know what they are. And that way when it comes time to teach procedures, I know them inside and out, and I can go through them with the kids. When you go to actually explain the procedures to your students, you need their full attention. That's why on your list here, if you look at the key procedures to practice, that's basically my list that I use. The first one is attention signal, because you need that before you can teach them anything else. It's very nice that on the first day of school, kids tend to be pretty subdued. What's going to happen? Yeah. So they're pretty quiet already. It's like the secret golden nugget to getting anything done. During that time, you can teach them the attention signal. Right? So the little kids, I like the clapping, right? By the time they get to be like 10, they're like, I don't know. So you might do something else. Like my keyword is 3rd, 4th, and 5th. I need your attention. Right? It's a little more natural, but still a specific phrase, and then they know stop what you're doing, look at Miss Hahn, and that's all. So you go through your list of key procedures until they've learned them. Practicing is the biggest thing here. You need lots of time to practice procedures until they are how you want them. How do you know when you're done teaching procedures? Well, when it's running by itself and you don't have to kind of feel like you're walking on eggshells wondering if it's going to go okay. So until you get to the point where you're confident, I know that 5th grade math is going to line up, get with their math books and the pencils and papers ready to go back, make sure to remind them. Once you're confident in that and you can turn your back and it's happening, then the procedure is learned. So of course this means a lot of time to practice. If you look at the other handout I gave you, this is just sort of a reference. This is my lesson plan for the first week of school last school year. And if you look closely, you can see where it was highlighted. It's kind of grayish sections. All those spots are where I built into the lesson plan time to practice procedures. So as you can see, I took chunks of time that would normally be classes, and all we did was practice procedures. And then, of course, you have to have some classes, right? But even in the midst of those, you're still practicing raising your hand or lining up or whatever it might be. So this kind of gives you a picture of how often to do it. And it looks like this for the first, I would say, 3 weeks of school. The main thing you're teaching the first 2-3 weeks is the procedures and transitions, as we'll get to. When you're teaching procedures, keep in mind it's a skill to learn, and if they don't do it, they're not necessarily being off. They haven't learned the skill yet. So I kind of like the comparison to something like long division that you would teach normally in your classroom. If they don't get long division, they're not being naughty. You haven't learned it yet. So how do you teach them long division? Well, you practice again and again. You show them how you model how it's done. You have to practice on their own. You affirm, well, that's right, well, that's wrong, and then you just get it until they learned it. If they get the wrong answer, you don't say, in a mean voice, like, try this again, that was really bad, right? You encourage them to really get it. So the key word is teach, and if you're constantly correcting, they haven't taught it yet. You haven't taught it yet. If you talk your lesson on long division, and you had to make a ton of corrections, and eventually they get the right answer, well, they still haven't learned it yet, because they're not doing it on their own, and you had to correct them sometimes. And what if you get frustrated? Well, it just means they need more practice. So practice again and again, keep it positive. If you start to get frustrated or bored, which I usually get bored before the kids do, just check yourself. This is important. It's going to be important for later in the year when you're learning things. So just keep at it. Let's see. Okay, we already looked at the lesson plan. Anytime that it needs polishing or you get irritated, just practice it again. This can be any time of year. Like after Christmas might be a good time. They've had a break. Or honestly, any time that you see, oh, the hallway's getting messy again. Let's have a practice of how to clean the hallway on Fridays. Or silent work time. There's lots of talking going on. Everyone knows the last half hour of school is silent work time. So let's take part of our literature time today. Everybody, you're going to pretend that it's end of the school year or end of the school day. And let's see if you can quietly work for 10 minutes, and then that'll be our practice. So if something isn't going right, just schedule in a time to practice it until it's right. Okay, and then how are we doing on time? Great, okay. Kind of as a subset of procedures, but it's important enough it kind of deserves its own section, is transitions. So that's the last point on your outline. And on the back side of this paper is an example of the transitions that I plan in my class. It looks like a lot because it is. When you plan transitions, you're looking at your schedule, back to the site, and what the students need to bring, and where do they need to go for every segment of the day. And then you explain to them what those things are, and you practice it with them. Does it sound like a lot? Yes. Is it a lot? Yes. But they need to know these things, and it's worth it in the end. So you don't have to read all of this necessarily. I just kind of wanted to show you how much it is. And it takes a lot of planning, looking at your own schedule and figuring out what those transitions should be. I literally, first day of school, first 2 days of school, I have this on a clipboard, along with like procedures. So it's all ready to go, so I can remember what they are, so I can be consistent. So I can be thinking ahead to what needs to happen next, and I can kind of remind the kids, okay, you remember what we do after lunch? Okay, let's see if you can do that after you come in from lunch, and so forth. So you have to know your stuff. The last thing on your list here, take notes on where to go, what to bring, what to do when you're not being instructed. That would be for a multi-grade class or open school. And then what expectations you have for movement during each. So you might have a different expectation for movements from your classroom to another classroom than you would from the kids are coming in from recess. I have no control over that, and they're going to come and grab their stuff. Right? So you might need to differentiate a little bit there. When to teach it? Well, you can have walkthroughs for little chunks of the transitions on the first 2 days of school. So first day of school, I like them to know what to do when they come in the morning. So I think that might be on the lesson plan here. Yeah, so with the 10 o'clock-ish time, review and practice morning routine. So, this one would work for them. So here's what you bring. Here's what you do. Let's practice it 3 times and see if you can do it. And maybe all right, what to bring. See if you can remember that. And go over it on the first day of school. And then however you end up scheduling into that first week, you go over with them the middle of the day, end of the day, and maybe eventually whole day together. Let's see if you can, I'll tell you what class is coming and you go there and you remember what to bring. So it takes a lot of practice. Okay, I think I covered most of that. It seems to take forever, but kids are smart. And I'm actually convinced the biggest hurdle is you. The biggest hurdle is the teacher. Not knowing what's coming, right? So that's why the list is important. Planning ahead is important. So you know what's coming. And you can teach your kids to think that way too, right? especially depending on how old they are. Okay, you guys know what's coming next, right? What should you have ready? And then they can kind of think forward like that. Okay. I think that's about all I had for transitions. Since I have a couple extra minutes, these are just a few kind of random classroom management things that are good to kind of keep in mind the first week of school, that people have told me that I found really helpful. So one of them is be large and in charge. Back to the authority thing. One teacher gave me this image of like a teacher at the helm of the ship, and you are the captain. These are all your little crewmates, right? And they trust you, and you're gonna tell them what to do, but it's great. And this means you can do things like ignore raised hands, so you can say, "Tell me later," because you are large and in charge. Another one is listen. So actually listening to your students, which sounds obvious, but I know sometimes I need to be reminded of this. So maintaining eye contact with students. Don't assume you know what their question is going to be or what their answer is going to be, but actually listen, process, respond, have a conversation. It just goes, if I'm conscious about that, it goes so much better. And if the students know from day one that you're going to listen to them, then they trust you. Next one is look. Just look around the classroom sometimes and see what kids are doing. And again, I find myself guilty of not doing this because you get so bogged down with, okay, this lesson's next. I have these papers I can correct in these 5 minutes, and I'll look what time it is, right? But if you just sit or stand and for just half a minute, look around at what's happening. You might see that Johnny is having trouble with his math. He's almost crying. Or you might see these two girls are looking a little mischievous. What's going on over there, right? You kind of just get to know your students. And as much as I love help at recess time, I really have benefited from being out with kids at recess. Kind of see what they're up to. Get to know them better in their more natural habitat. And then the last piece of advice is to get sleep. And again, yes, I know I'm both preaching to the choir and kind of speaking as a hypocrite, but it is so important. And the days where you do get enough sleep, I'm sure you know you teach so much better the next day. So just to keep in mind that that's also a priority to be a good teacher. So teaching is a joy because we're privileged to act in the stead of parents and serve Jesus' dearly bought Christian children. Biblical and well thought out classroom management is part of that task, and it too can be joyful. I hope this talk was a helpful resource to you as you lay the theological and practical groundwork for your school years to be a smashing success. Thank you. We've got a good 10 minutes here, I think, for your questions, for your thoughts. I know a lot of this was kind of directed more to the elementary age. That's what I have experience in. And hopefully, if you don't have that age, your brains are kind of spinning of, oh, how could I apply these older kids or to homeschool? But if you have any things to share or any questions, I would love to keep the conversation going. So any questions? Yes.
I'm sure I have a first question, but if the student's parents are not on board with discipline, for example, the student who's in really, the student who's been put in detention, and the mom says, "Oh, we can't do that today," and tries to pick him up with the headmaster right there. Headmaster did not allow that, but
sure. I guess this is where something like a school handbook is really helpful, right?
exactly.
This is our policy. You signed it, right? I mean, ultimately, it's the parent, and she's going to do what she wants, and we can't stop her. But I guess that's something where if it were me in that case, I would mention the handbook. I'd be polite, and I'd just talk to the headmaster, and then it gets passed up, and yeah, Pastor Richard, you have to deal with it. Yeah, that's a good question. That'd be tough.
Sometimes that means the next day when the parent isn't there, you say, "Oh, by the way, you missed yesterday's detention, so today you're serving it." The parent, take a parent out of the equation sometimes.
All right, I have questions. Yes.
Do you do any kind of training of parents before school, back to school meetings and things like that?
Sure, yeah, so at Mount Hope we do like offices for each school year, so we go over the handbooks and parents at their house. And then we typically offer like a back to school night where parents come to school And there's kind of like some general stuff about the school year, and then we like go to each student's classroom and the teacher gets a chance to go over like any pertinent information which could be, here are gonna be my expectations, and that'd be a good idea to do that.
Let me tack onto that. Somebody who's always been I step in to teach Latin at a school, and I'm not there for homeroom or kind of the setup routine. I wish somebody would come around and tell me like this is kind of what we do here.
Sure.
Sometimes the kids come in, the students come in, and they're very well prepared. They have a great homeroom and everything's set up well. Sometimes they don't, but the ability to have somebody, especially those roles like music and art that sometimes are brought in from outside, that we're looking for somebody. The
Right.
ability to say with direction, this is what we're doing. I need your help. I would have loved that.
Sure. So you're talking about like the main teacher.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Headmaster, principal, and
Sure.
teachers just telling
Sure.
us.
Yeah. And I would say even if that's not in place, this would be harder to do in that kind of situation. But as the teacher slipping in for the one class, I think you still can establish like when I'm here, this is how it is. Right? It's still gonna be kind of a battle, but I think you could do that, right? Because if you expect that, or at least give them something. Alright. Anything else?
Maybe tangentially related, but with procedures and transitions, like the nuts and bolts. Do you have experience with division of labor or like classroom jobs?
Oh yeah. I would say I do it when I know it's actually gonna be less work for me. Which there are very few things, I guess, in the ages that I've taught and that's really helpful. But I'll do things like put a watering can on so and so's desk and then you'll need to water the plants today. Or like in Miss Engel's class, she has like a helper of the day, right, for K through 2, and there's certain tasks that that student's gonna do throughout the day. So yeah, that could be a really helpful one to do. Sure. Yes.
I would say younger is even better for that, just because preschoolers, if you skip their day, they remember all year.
That's true. Yeah. You need the chart of like who's turning.
Yeah, you have to check dots.
Yeah. Yes.
Do you have any experience for what age they don't have to necessarily raise their hand and they can just kind of intuitively know when they can speak up in class?
Yeah, that was a question on my mind teaching 3rd through 5th. Because when I have 5th grade literature, I like it when kids can just kind of jump in. So I guess the best thing I've found is you make it really clear to them when that time is, right? So I've not done well at this, but I think like in the coming year, what I'll do is I'll say, okay, during literature time, you don't have to raise your hand unless you can't interrupt each other, right?
Right.
Don't interrupt who's turning just to read, but so a discussion time, kind of like the section before me with Pastor Cholak, right? He was talking about Socratic dialogue, so just establishes boundaries.
Do you have suggestions for what students are doing when they're not in elementary grade?
Yeah. So what I'd like to do is like in the younger grades, like K through 2, have a list of here's what you do. So I call it following the arrows. You can do it however you want. So it might be like work on memory work for 10 minutes. And then finish, I guess first would be homework, right? Homework, work on memory work, do this worksheets, and then color a read, right? And you can put that around whatever word you want, you send it out. But that way they know I'm done with my work or I'm not being instructed. Here's my list of things to do, and they don't have to ask you, they don't have to wonder. In my classroom, I just give them like 3 options for all school year. They can do some extra worksheet they have in their desk. They can do something on the counter, so I have like learning games or worksheets there, or they can read. And so they just know throughout the whole year that's too. Oh, and draw. Now, does that answer your question? Okay. Any questions? Yes.
I just have a reflection on acting in school where somebody forgot their lines and the rest of the actors realized their job was to make it seem as if it never happened. So you've got all these procedures, but the principle I learned there was always act like you know what you're doing even when you don't.
Yes, that's definitely true. Yes. Especially when the kids are little. Yes.
And then, question way back to the beginning about leisure.
Yeah.
And maybe I misunderstood you, but it sounded like you were sort of contrasting leisure with work. The thing we work hardest for is the most valuable thing, sort of thing. And I was thinking about what Pastor Cholak said about how what he was talking about. Adler said, right? To think is like the most painful and difficult thing we can do. Right? And so I was trying to like square that circle. Okay, leisure is this receptive attitude, maybe, or this lack of rushing or impatience, but also it's difficult. It's not easy. And so I don't know. Is that my misunderstanding, or could you?
No, I
help
think
us fit together.
it is a little bit paradoxical, I think, at least in my reading of Pieper. But I think leisure is like an attitude is sort of what I was getting at. To know that you're at peace and know your place and know all is well. And then like within that mindset, you can work really hard and you should work really hard. And I'm not trying to like oppose the receptive and the active learning because we're human, we have both. I was just kind of stressing the receptive because I think that gets overlooked. But yeah, good point. There's a lot to chew on.
I just read Pieper yesterday, so I'm gonna chime in there.
Okay.
He talks about the framing of intellectual work, and that was sort of a shift to value intellectual activity as labor.
Yeah.
And he's trying to push back against that as part of the cult of total work. And so I think he'd probably be hesitant to frame any type of intellectual activity as labor.
Yeah, sure.
Because it fits under that like homo faber mindset, right? That man is the worker rather than man the worshiper.
Yeah, he was trying to pull out the intellect being defined as work, right? This is actually
Right.
is that kind
I
of
think so.
yeah,
I think so.
yeah.
Yeah.
It's a dense read. Like it's hard to grasp it, at least for me. So I need to read it again and again to refresh myself.
Yeah.
Okay, maybe like one or two more. Everybody has something? Yes.
How do you enforce something like behavior in chapel where you don't want it to come down too law heavy because you don't want them to associate like negative effects with chapel,
Sure.
but also make sure they're not playing Uno in the middle of madness.
Yeah. I guess remember when I drilled it into what we practiced at the beginning of the year, so I probably didn't list it here, but added into your procedures. And then once they know the expectation and they practice it and they have plenty of fair practice, and then just hold them to it. I mean, it was not pretty when I took Mr. Kindergarten out 4 days a week. And it seemed very mean, but I just was sticking to what I said. And I don't think kids perceive that as being like law-ish in chapel. I just think they see it, this is consistent, this is how Miss Hahn is, and it's not bad. So yeah. Yes.
I would think you could even have like a practice chapel session with just your class too. And I've read about this in parenting books too. Like, well, if you have trouble in church, you could go practice in church when it's not church time.
Yeah.
And I had never thought of that.
Yeah. Definitely. That's really helpful.
It's hard for me to be also the pianist for
So you're to be with your kids in chapel? Or with your kids?
we have an end of the day where it's just a cappella, but
Okay.
yeah, can happen.
Okay. Yeah. I guess if you have to like enlist other people to do it, you tell them the expectations and hopefully they can implement it. Okay. I think we're about at time. Okay, thank you very much.